Hi, I would like today to present you my game against Magnus Carlsen from Stavanger 2017. Was actually, I think at that time was highest average ELO tournament ever. So I think was 9 out of top 10 players. Anyway, practically everyone was playing. Was a memorable tournament, brilliantly won by Livon Aranyan, who made +3, and actually I shared second, third with Nakamura with +1. I remember, if I remember correctly. Actually, was not a fortunate event for Magnus, and I managed to beat him in this tournament. And also, by the way, Levon Aranyan won a beautiful game against him, also very attacking in attacking style. So I can recommend you to have a look at it on your own, or maybe Levon will record a course on his best games. That game would definitely be one out of many great games he have played. So yes, and this game is very complicated, very sharp. Well, you cannot really consider beating Magnus Carlsen in an easy way, just to make him very simple, some attack, you put your pieces nearby the king and you mate. I mean, at least in classical chess, for sure not. So it was a good game. I believe I really played it well, and that game would be more showing the importance of calculation. So I was presenting you different games. Of course, always when you attack, it's always very important to calculate variations. But sometimes actually, and you will see in this game that everything depends actually on just on one move. Let's say when you start your attack, when you start sharp play, and you whether you should be just lucky that this move, not completely lucky, because it's also about intuition. Sometimes you just intuitively feel that it should work, and finally it works. At times it doesn't, unfortunately, also. But the importance also of calculation, simply very, very deep and accurate calculation of variations. And of course, again, that pretty much depends on abilities of calculation. Sometimes even depends on your shape, even on the way you slept last night. Yeah, your head is fresh, or maybe you didn't have enough sleep, and your calculating abilities immediately start to decrease. But in any case, I think it's a good example that sometimes, because you could, by the games which I've shown you, you could get an impression in quite many games that there was not that much calculation. That's true. Sometimes it happens, but sometimes it's actually, it really requires a lot of precision in this element of chess, calculation of variations. It shows pretty much this game that what is the most important is not to calculate everything. It's impossible, but actually to see one move ahead than your opponent. That is enough. So we are not computers. We cannot, calculate all those complicated variations. And you will see here how complicated were the lines. A lot of incredible resources, which is difficult to see over the board. But anyways, in this particular game, it's a rare exclusion when usually it's other way around. But when I managed to outcalculate Magnus Carlsen and saw maybe one move more than he in the most important line, and that proved to be decisive factor in this game. So I started with e4. I was white, so e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop c4, bishop c5, a typical Italian, c3, knight f6, d3, d6, castles, a6, rook e1, bishop a7, a4. This is a tabia, castles, h3. Now more popular is h6. The plan with h6 and rook e8, followed by bishop e6. I've played it, by the way, myself against Magnus Carlsen also in Vaikanze 2018. And made a draw with black, but Magnus decided to go for knight e7 plan, also a very popular plan. I think there was probably more than one game in in the match Carlsen-Karyakin 2000, when was it, 2016. So Magnus, of course, analyzed it a lot, obviously, since he was playing it in this match, and I was sure, I suppose, about his preparation. It's true, it's also a very decent move, but things are not so, I mean, it's not so easy for black. Actually, in general, as we already know now, that this plan with a4 in Italian, now it's very fashionable. I mean, it's not easy for black to equalize. Very serious attempt for white to fight for a small advantage out of the opening, which is already after e4, e5 is a big deal nowadays. So knight e7, black just wants to get his knight to g6, rook e8, and maybe c6, d5 even one day. So white is making use of the fact that knight went out from c6 and playing d4 immediately, knight g6, knight bd2. Because with a knight on c6, obviously the d4 pawn would be hanging, permanently hanging, and it will be difficult to keep the center, without. And white's idea is that he doesn't really want to play d5, obviously, here. It would open up this bishop, the diagonal for the bishop. So ideally, he wants to keep the pawn on d4 and try to get his knight on g3. If he manages, usually he has some advantage. The point is that black is trying some ideas here. It's pretty direct position, not to allow white so easily to maneuver his knight. So c6, for the moment, of course, if knight starts to go to f1, then black can, let's say, take on d4, play d5 as one of the options. So the bishop is retreating, bishop d3. Actually, knight f4 looks tempting, but knight is not doing that much on f4. I mean, bishop can go to f1, and now e5 pawn is hanging. So knight f4 is not recommended. There were many games in this position afterwards, and black still, is struggling to equalize 100%, but I think it's getting closer and closer to equalize. But I think rook e8, the move which Magnus have played, was maybe not the most accurate. Strangely enough, it's a very logical move, because after bishop c2, that was actually a novelty at that moment, a very important move, because the whole idea is that white has to start his knight f1 maneuver only when black, I mean, if he wants to fight for advantage, only when black cannot push d5, or at least d5 move doesn't equalize immediately. That's why bishop c4 is a kind of prophylactic idea. The point is that now, for instance, d5 doesn't work so well because of, I guess, more than one reason. Maybe the simplest is just to take on e5, takes on e5, rook e5, knight f3, at least this. And rook has to retreat, and then white can play, for instance, e5. And usually, if he manages e5, he can potentially have a very dangerous attack on the king side. So d5 is not working yet. h6 was played by Magnus. Maybe there are better options. We need to, I mean, again, this is not an opening course, so you can study. There were a lot of games also after this one, and black is trying different moves, but definitely h6 doesn't seem to equalize fully. I mean, again, logical move, but after knight f1, it seems that black is not in time to manage d5. Here, I mean, to equalize with it. Of course, it's definitely playable d5, but doesn't seem to equalize fully. And so, for instance, if black is playing d5, then white can just take on e5, knight e5, d5. Yes, again, I suppose if rook takes e5, white can try to play bishop f4, attacking the rook, and then e5. Very important, as I mentioned already, to have the pawn on e5 in this position. So maybe black's best chance is to take on e4 here. And here it's a matter of tempus, this position, because e5 pawn is a bit weak. I mean, even bishop e3 is possible. I'm not quite sure black can equalize here, because after takes on e3, rook e3, he cannot take on e5 because of f3. f3, and then, of course, losing the knight because of the pin. But maybe queen g5 can work. Anyways, it's quite tight. I mean, this idea for black, it's not clear if he manages fully to equalize fully here. But unpleasant enough is bishop takes c4, d4, queen takes d8, rook takes d8, and now bishop e3. Because, of course, not taken on e4 because rook d1 is unpleasant pin. After bishop e3, it seems that black has some problems in this position. It's not so easy to equalize, especially because you see these pawns, pawn chain. If pawn would have been on a5, it would have been much much closer to equality. But here, let's say in case of exchange of this bishop, white can potentially put pawn on a5, and then this b7 pawn is weak. On top of it, it's actually difficult simply to keep the pawn. I mean, after bishop b8, bishop d4, it seems that white manages to be pawn up at the end of the day. And even though with two bishops, black always has considerable drawing chances, but it's not guaranteed draw, and you have to suffer for the rest of the game. So that's not usually what Magnus likes to do right out of the opening, at least. So, and what else to do? I think my opponents took quite some time now to think what to do, maybe half an hour, because I think he didn't like how things went out of the opening, because of course black can just play developing moves like bishop e6, but knight g3 comes, and let's say queen c7, bishop e3, d5 is never really working. White always now controls d5, and then he wants queen d2, and he has a center and actually an advantage simply in this position. So I'm not sure that Magnus Carlsen wanted so much to play ed4. I mean, but at least I think it's probably the best practical decision, because it's already clear that black doesn't have full equality, and this makes a game a little sharper and a little bit more. I mean, there is at least some kind of counterplay for black, because otherwise he can really end up just in an unpleasant position without any counterplay. So e takes d4, c takes d4, c5. That is the idea of black trying to potentially activate his bishop, or at least to exchange it. So, for instance, in case of bishop e3, then c takes d4, bishop takes d4, it's very safe for white. Knight takes d4, let's say bishop d7, white is very safe, no risk at all. I mean, maybe tiny more comfortable position because of this pawn on d6, but in general black has all pieces well developed, a certain pressure on the e4 pawn, quite a typical Ruy Lopez structure. And but I would consider, if I would be black here, I would consider that I practically equalized. I mean, I wouldn't worry about my position. So I thought d5, also very typical way of playing. Of course, it's much more principal move. And now b5. That of course is the idea of black, because if he waits with b5, let's say playing bishop d7, then white, on top of other moves, anyway, black has to push b5 next. But white has a very unpleasant resource a5. And and black is lacking counterplay here, because his main counterplay, for the moment at least, is connected with queen side play. White will probably start to concentrate pieces in the center, knight g3, bishop e3, queen d2, and then he will see usually whether he's playing b4 on this side or trying to create threats on the other side of the board. So a5, I believe this position is very unpleasant for black, so that's why b5. And here, white has a pleasant choice. I mean, I had no doubt that I went out with a very nice position out of the opening. There was no doubt about it. But then the question, that two potentially different in nature plans. So one is to try to put the bishop on b2, like playing b3. It can be done now or on the next move. Or trying to play for the A line, for the pressure, I mean, to put bishop on e3. hard to say what is better. I mean, objectively, maybe having the bishop on b2 is, at least according to engines, they like it more. So I took ab first. Probably sooner or later it will be necessary to take on b5. And finally decided to go for the plan with the bishop on e3. Maybe b3 actually was also a pretty dangerous plan. Also for the moment just trying to stop c4, because at least after c4 black will have this weak pawn. So let's say bishop d7, bishop b2. I was not sure about c4. Of course, in this position, I wanted to have bishop on e3, obviously, that at least in case of c4, I can immediately exchange this bishop. BC, it's very tactic. I mean, it's very concrete, this position, queen d2. It's pretty much matter of tempus. If white manages to set up his pieces, knight g3, bishop c3, or bishop d4, he will have an advantage. But black has all sorts of ideas like knight h5. It seems that here e5, I mean, trying to play knight f4, seems that e5 here gives advantage to white, even though a lot of exchanges and maybe black has considerable chances to finally to make a draw. Or another idea is to play knight e5, for example, like this, takes, still knight e3, let's say queen c7, bishop c3. This position is, according to engines, is in white's favor. But which is probably true. I don't know how much better is it, and position simplified a bit, and I was a little bit annoyed by this bishop on a7, which potentially, is very powerful. But still, I liked it also. I was not sure what to do, I hesitated, but finally decided for knight g3, bishop d7, bishop e3. Of course, already having certain idea, which I'm going to show you later in my mind. I mean, so it was not only a positional decision, but also, of course, based on some interesting tactical ideas and some calculation. So here, the first important moment for black, what to do with the A line? Black's plan now is to try to push c4. He badly needs it sooner than later to exchange this bishop and to get some play maybe on the queen side, or to push pawns before later on. Of course, there is a drawback of having the pawn on c4 in such positions that d4 square becomes available, for instance, for the knight, for white's knight. But anyways, black doesn't have a very big choice. He needs to play c4, because otherwise, bishop will be pretty bad on a7. The question is how. Of course, the most logical way is queen c7. And frankly, when I played knight g3, I already had this idea in my mind, because what am I going to do against queen c7? In the game, bishop b6 was played, but that I was quite happy with white. I thought it's pretty dangerous for black. So, of course, the more logical way to change bishops is to play queen c7. And then black wants to go c4 next. And, you can immediately from the beginning of this lesson, I would ask you to think and how would you react on queen c7 with white? How would you fight for the opening advantage here? In fact, white's only chance to fight for opening advantage here is trying to mate black very quickly. As strange as it may seem, but when I saw this idea, because I was mostly concerned about queen c7 when deciding to put my bishop on a3, I saw this idea and suddenly I realized that it's actually very, very dangerous. And that made me play this plan. Because if black plays c4, as I've mentioned already, it should be okay on the next move. But actually, white can suddenly start to play, let's say, queen d2, and actually threatening bishop takes h6. I mean, after c4, bishop takes h6, it's the game over simply. gh, queen h6 leads to a mating attack, believe me or not. But because white is threatening e5, also threatening knight g5, knight h5 ideas. If black would have still queen on d8, then he has this defensive resource, queen e7, queen f8. But because the queen is on c7, that doesn't work. And actually, bishop h6 after queen d2 is a very, very big threat in this position. But if queen d2, then bishop b6 is possible. Black has this tactical resource to to meet bishop takes a6 with bishop a5. And even though there is some play after queen g5, but I doubt it's enough, probably shouldn't be enough. That's why finally my plan was to play queen c1. So just not to allow bishop e5 with a tempi in this variation. And now, for instance, already after bishop b6, I can just take on a8, take, and bishop takes h6. So bishop a5, there is no bishop a5 resource. And this position, gh, queen h6, well, mate is coming, queen d8, for example, e5, and white is just winning. It's just mate. I mean, black's best is simply to play queen f8. It's the only way not to lose by force, and then, well, white just 2 pawns up and have winning position. So after queen c1, well, it becomes very difficult for black what to do about bishop takes h6. c4 probably has to be played, at least with a queen on d2. That was just bad. Here, black has an additional important resource, bishop takes h6, and now bishop takes f2 check. That's the only move. Again, after gh, queen h6, even having this very powerful bishop on this diagonal, and seemingly white still needs a couple of tempes to mate, but black cannot do much with his extra piece. For instance, if he's trying to counterattack with the queen b6, then the simplest is just rook takes a7, rook takes a7, e5, and white is just winning here. So bishop takes f2 check. That is more or less playable for black, but still I think position is very dangerous. King takes f2, rook takes a1. That is the idea that forcing me to take on a1, and gh, at least the pawn on h6 is not hanging. But after queen c1, yeah, very dangerous still. Queen c5 check, king f1. What to do with a pawn on h6? I mean, if king g7, for instance, queen d2 looks very dangerous, and white is preparing knight d4, knight f5 check. And maybe c3 is a way to create counterplay on the other side, but then b4, according to engines, is a very strong move. And if queen takes b4, queen takes h6, it's, well, very likely to be mate quite soon. So let's say queen c4 check, king g1, king h7, and now, for instance, rook f1, starting an attack on f-line. Yeah, very, very dangerous position for black. So actually, queen c7, yeah, queen c1 is I don't know, maybe it's too strong to say a refutation, but almost a refutation. And that makes black's task to equalize actually quite difficult, because bishop b6 has to be played, then rook takes a8, queen takes a8, and now at least black is not yet threatening to play c4. And queen a1 was an interesting move just to play like this, but my plan was to play b4, to make use of the fact that the bishop is not protected, and to start, actually I want to get this pawn structure to take on c5 and to have my 2 passed pawns in the center. After b4, black has a difficult choice. I mean, let's say what to do. Yeah, here, let's say queen b7 or queen a7. That, I guess, black must protect this bishop in order to be able to play cb next move. Magnus played the most logical move, queen a7, but it has some drawbacks as well. What else is possible to do? Queen b7, b takes c5. White can always play queen d2 here, but then black would probably take on b4, and even though sometimes this position, because of this very powerful central pawns, can be, well, still in white favor, but here probably black, I mean, not here probably, yeah, because black will manage to get certain play on the c line, and should be enough for black to equalize. So my idea was to take bc5, and I understand, it's not funny, so to say, to play like this with black, even though engines assess it as more or less acceptable position for black. but very difficult, very dangerous position, because, for instance, if bishop takes c5, then my idea is to take on c5, and now, okay, I can just play queen d2, because those pawns, b and c pawns, of course, are awfully dangerous potentially. But for now, it's difficult to push them. To push before c4. I will not let black play before c4. And white center, white just needs one move e5 at some point, and e6, and then it will be just crushing, yeah? The only problem that for now the d5 pawn is hanging, but maybe my next, at some point, I can protect the d5 pawn and push e5, so not easy. But maybe even the more straightforward move d6 is, I think that is what I wanted, just followed by e5. And humanly, this position looks really dangerous for black. But for instance, engine is just saying bishop e6, e5, knight d7 is not too bad. It still gives white some plus, some advantage, but according to engines, it's more or less holdable. Well, yeah, not I would not go for it with black. For instance, white has some ideas like take, knight h4, f4. It doesn't look good, but maybe if you're a stockfish or AlphaZero even, preferably, you can go for this position and hold it. But I understand Magnus was not really a very big fan of this type of play. Or d takes c5, then of course again white can play slowly, like queen d2. Also sometimes still bishop h6 is on the agenda, but actually d6 is very interesting. And now, yeah, so we start already from this moment on, we start to have some attacking ideas. Actually, white's position is very harmonious. Yeah, all the pieces are in the best places, looking at the king side, so it's quite logical for white to start direct play. And for instance, there are some quite beautiful lines here. For example, if queen c6 looks logical, now suddenly bishop takes h6 already works. Gh, queen d2, and black is probably in serious trouble already, because white wants to play e5, queen takes h6, and has more pieces. Yeah, as I've mentioned already, one of the main signals that your attack there is a good chance that your attack will work, is when you have more pieces in attack than in defense. And here it's obviously the case. And let's say computer gives the following variation: king h7, e5, knight g8, knight h5. And again, white is better according to engine here. Computer manages somehow to survive, at least not to lose immediately. But yeah, it's if already a piece down, first of all, it looks very good for white. Secondly, if a computer being a piece down assesses the position in white's favor, probably it's really a bad sign. So that is dangerous. Another idea, for example, is bishop c6, trying to counterattack in the center, but queen c1, again, the same idea, just trying to play bishop takes h6. And yeah, again, it's very, very dangerous for black. For instance, rook e6, main line of engine, and now just takes on h6. Not, by the way, also queen b2 is interesting move, but taken on h6 is dangerous enough. Gh, knight f5, and now somehow after knight h5, again, computer is managing to hold at least for some time. Knight h6 check, king f8, and now white has knight g5, very dangerous move. Also queen g5 is dangerous. Doesn't look good at all. I understand fully that Magnus was not happy about this kind of position. So he played queen a7 with the obvious idea that in case of b takes c5, of course he wants to keep his pawn on d6 in order to stop white's center from advancing. To take like this, queen takes c5, queen d2, and again, yeah, this position is at best a little bit better for white, or maybe just equal. But queen a7, yeah, very important drawback of the move of the queen a7 move is queen a1. This is a very important move. Again, like this, I'm not letting black take on b4, so I'm trying to keep this pin. And black has a very difficult choice now. Of course, it's not, taking on a1 is really doesn't look good, because the a line in this position is very important, and the bishop is still pinned. So let's say queen takes a1, rook takes a1, rook b8. Just trying to play c takes b4, but now simply b takes c5, and even in the endgame, this central pawns d5, e4 proved to be more important, more valuable than the side pawns, because both sides have two connected pass pawns, but whites are more efficient, because let's say maybe dc5 is hard to say. In both cases, black's position is difficult. dc5, now a very good move, knight d2. Knight d2, just trying to, not to let, for example, obviously b4 is bad because of knight c4. White is preparing f4, so slowly advance of his pawns. And for instance, c4, the most logical move in the position, but now the problem is the a line, because takes and rook a8 check. Rook becomes extremely active on a8, and black has black is pretty much in trouble. Knight f8, and now even f4. I mean, the point is that black cannot really advance his pawn. So if before the pawn on c4 is hanging, rook on a8 is very unpleasant, and let's say after c3, white is blocking the pawns, knight b3, b4, and he can even just get his king somewhere to d4, king f2. I mean, this rook on a8 is really bothering black a lot, and black's position is pretty bad actually here. Then what else? Bishop takes c5, but again, takes. Black wants to start pushing his pawns. Very unpleasant move, rook a7. Yeah, you see again and again how important is the a line. In general, in typical Ruy Lopez structures, it's pretty well known that the a line is a big deal for white. And here, rook a7, now I'm threatening e5, because the d5 pawn was hanging, but now, let's say after b4, white can already play e5, because the bishop on d7 is not protected after knight takes d5. So black has to do something about this e5 threat, probably bishop e8, most logical. And now very good maneuver, rook c7, attacking the pawn, c4, and after c4, black cannot really push his pawns anymore. So white can, for instance, play knight f5, and the position is pretty bad. Black's position, engine is already given more than +1 for white, because true, I mean, white is much more active, and only thing left is to start pushing the pawns, which will probably come sooner than later. And black has, with these passive pieces, probably will not be able to parry this threat. So queen takes a1 is not pleasant. Then another idea is to play rook a8 here. So the same idea that, but at least after exchange of the queens, of course not bishop a7, because after rook a1 the pin is decisive. Rook takes a7, so now at least black has the a line, but again this pin is very unpleasant. Now very strong move is rook d1. Rook d1, because white is just threatening to push e5. Yeah, and again, very difficult to do something about it. For example, if rook c7, that again with the idea that, as we already know, to keep the pawn on d6. So let's say after bc5 to take with the bishop on c5, and that would be an acceptable position for black. But the problem of rook c7, on top of a simple move like bishop d3, also not quite clear what is black's next, with this very annoying pin on the diagonal. But actually e5 is already very strong. Knight takes e5, knight takes e5, d5, d6. So some tactics already start to work. Rook c8 and knight f5. This is very, very painful, because let's say if king f8, just knight e7, and then when the rook retreats, bc5, and the pawns will just sooner than later promote. What to do after knight f5? Same if takes, again, in order not to not to let the d pawn queen. Black has to move with his rook somewhere on the 8th rank, and then of course b takes c5 with a winning advantage. So, and or bishop d8, bc5, it's clear with these two very powerful pass pawns, white has very good chances to win the game. So also difficult, but the most logical move is queen c7. Yeah, I mean, what else to do? Other, as we already mentioned, the other moves are not working so well. But now the problem is tactical. Now that is the point of queen a1, because again, now black is ready to take on b4 and actually equalize. Or bc5, bishop c5, exchange the bishops, and very close to equality. Well, white can always do something like that, but as I mentioned already, this wouldn't be a very big deal for white. But the problem of queen c7 is bishop takes h6. Now the knight on f6 is hanging. And here the game, it's the most principal move. Of course, it required very, very serious calculation, because the game turns, but it's the only way for white really to fight for advantage. So I spent quite some time playing this move, calculating variations. It is clear that the black's position is very dangerous, but well, it's not. Yeah, it's about whether it works or not. Yeah, I mean, dangerous is a good way to explain it when you're commenting a game. But when you're playing against the world champion, you better try to be more precise and just believing that you have a very nice initiative and his position is dangerous. Well, I needed to calculate quite a lot of variation. So of course c takes b4. That is the idea. Here, true. What is good about my position, that I saw that, for instance, I can just play rook c1. It's a solid move, and it's with quite. Black has queen c3 here, and let's say bishop g5. Very strange, complicated position. Hard to say. I mean, actually, computer thinks that white has a very tiny better, some small advantage, but I don't know, very complicated. But at least for sure, white is not worse here. But okay, so when you play bishop h6, when you start your attack, it's always nice to know that there is some way in the meantime, while you calculating a lot of forced lines, but you somehow feel safer when you know there is a way to equalize if finally you will find out some hole in your calculation. But I couldn't find any hole, so I took on g7. That was my plan. Now it's really starts. Of course, the idea is that if king takes g7, knight h5 check, of course this doesn't work. So the play is very direct. Queen takes c2. Queen takes f6. And this is a critical moment of the game. So it's a good actually calculating exercise, not only also attacking, also it's about finding resources, actually very rich position, difficult to calculate everything. Very difficult task, but still, again, since we are trying to improve, in our play in such positions from both sides, defender and attacker. So try to calculate here, try to find the best move. Well, it's pretty obvious black has only two moves, taking on f2, but with what? There is a queen f2 or bishop f2. So try to calculate as much as possible. Take a long time, because it's a very difficult task. I can please you with the fact that even since Magnus was thinking for like good 20 minutes here or more, but he still made the wrong choice. So don't worry if you also make a mistake, but it's a good training. It's a good calculation, kind of high-level calculation training. So give it a try. So hope your solution was bishop takes f2 check. Yeah, this is the correct move, and black is saving the game with it. Of course, you need to see quite a lot. Obviously, Magnus was considering seriously this move, but couldn't see how to proceed. Actually, I also during the game I thought I thought that Queen F2 I'm better, but after Bishop F2 I also thought I'm better. Actually, like both of us, we agreed. I remember after the game that we both thought that this variation is pretty forced. Bishop takes F2 check, King H2. Well, of course, obviously Bishop takes E1. This I hope you saw that it doesn't work because of Bishop C3, because of Bishop H6, and now whatever piece. Queen G7 mate is threatening, and whatever black plays with the queen or bishop on C3, then E5 comes. And Bishop G3, King G3, for example, and mate is coming. So that is clearly not an option. Then there is some kind of counter strike, Bishop takes H3, but it doesn't work because of more than one reason. Actually, the best is Knight F5. It's a nice move. Threatening, by the way, Knight H6 check, just to show you, for instance, if you take, it's pretty nice mate. Knight H6 check, King H7, Knight G5 mate. So this is a threat, and after Bishop takes F5, Bishop H6, again the same motive, Queen C3, E5, and mate is coming. But obviously Black has absolutely only move, Queen C3, and here E5 already doesn't work so much. Knight E5, Rook E5, it looks tempting, but after Rook E5, Bishop H6 or somewhere else, some other squares, the problem is that after taking on H3, Black can play a move like Rook H5 and then protecting the diagonal. Actually, he's better here simply, if not winning. But we both saw after Queen C3, we both saw that after Rook E2, Black is forced to go to a difficult endgame. That's why Magnus didn't like Bishop takes F2 check. So Rook E2, and now it seemingly there is nothing better than to take on F6, go back with a bishop, because Bishop takes G3, King takes G3 is obviously a very difficult position. The bishop is just a monster on F6. Equal pawns, but black pawn will never promote because of this bishop. And finally, white is in de facto, de jure it's equal pawns. De facto, white is practically a pawn up and having a positional advantage. So that endgame is difficult, and Magnus didn't want to play it. But in case if black removes his bishop, let's say bishop c5, maybe rook a2 is interesting move, but that's too delicate somehow, too complicated. I thought knight h5 and followed by bishop b2, knight f6 comes, and it looks like white is simply much better here. So here I stopped my calculation, so okay, clearly white is better. The same, I think, at the press conference, Magnus was told that, or in his interview somewhere, that he had the same idea that this endgame should be much better for white. But strangely enough, engines just saying rook a8, bishop b2, king f8. Hard to believe that after knight f6, king e7, the position is equal. I mean, the h pawn starts to run with the bishop on b2. It's difficult to assess this position correctly, because it really doesn't look good for black with this powerful diagonal knight on f6. And the b pawns, again, they are not really promoting, because bishop on b2 is holding everything. But okay, this is normally this must be better for white, but not in this particular position. So that was the way for black to play. But then on top of this, there is an amazing resource for black, which is bishop takes g3 check instead of queen takes f6 here. Bishop takes g3 check, king takes g3. And now, try to find this resource. Try your best. I mean, what black can do, then exchange queens and just get into a difficult endgame. This, of course, we miss both, because it's really a very difficult move to see. Is bishop f5. Amazing move. I mean, I can take with both pawn and queen, but it seems that is a way for black to equalize. Because in case of ef, I mean, black is just taken on f6, I suppose, first bishop f6, rook e2, and after fg, the problem is the b pawn starts to run. Yeah, of course, this is not recommended for white. So after bishop f5, and if I take on c3, then already the pawn on e4 is hanging. Rook b2, bishop d7, and it's still white, because of this very powerful diagonal. White has some advantage, but it obviously must end in a draw the game. Again, the computer is showing the best move in this position. The most interesting try for white is rook c2. Yeah, I told you, there's a lot of talent. Stockfish has a lot of talent. So rook c2, because if queen takes c2, then bishop h6, we know already this idea, queen c3, e5 is made. Forcing black to take on f6, bishop f6, and black cannot take with the bishop because, strangely enough, after rook e2, the pin is decisive. Because in case of king f8, there is knight g5, yeah, and then knight h7. So black has to take with the rook, and still rook a2. I mean, still black's king is in danger, but bishop d7, yeah, again, of course, it's more comfortable position for white, but it must be a draw at the end of the day. Well, yeah, of course, to see this resource bishop f5, I mean, if you already played bishop takes f2 check, that is probably, if you start to think in this particular position, that is probably findable, even though quite difficult. But you know, the problem of black here is that he needs to make a choice in this particular position. And then, and he needs to calculate a lot of variations after queen takes f2 check also. So yeah, that task is much more difficult. And I believe that Magnus, yeah, decided that he is quite a difficult endgame is waiting for him after bishop takes f2. So he wanted to make work queen takes f2 check, and he almost managed, but almost. So king h2 and bishop d8. That was the idea of black, because of course knight e5 is at least saving black from mating attack. But then after knight takes e5, queen takes f6, bishop f6, d5, knight h5. Again, the same. You see this motive that knight coming to f6, and black's position is pretty difficult because white wants to retreat with the bishop and put the knight on f6. And on top of everything, the difference compared to that position after bishop takes f2 check is that white has a very dangerous pass d pawn. b3 never really works because I can just pick up the pawn. So here black's position is pretty difficult. But bishop d8, that was the plan. Bishop d8, queen takes d6 has to be played, because let's say if I want to get the same type of position here already, black is perfectly fine. Even f5 is actually a very good move, and black is at least not worse. White can still manage to make a draw, but definitely no more than that. So queen takes d6 has to be played. Bishop is hanging, and knight h4. That was the plan, that was the idea of Magnus here. There is another interesting move, bishop takes h3. It's a little bit too much, of course, but still white has to be accurate here. King takes h3, king takes g7. So at least black's idea is to take the pawn, because if immediately king takes g7, I can just take on d7, yeah? And on top of better position, I'm also pawn up. But after bishop h3, king h3, king g7, the most accurate way is actually very nice. It's just to play rook e2, and in case of rook h8 check, king g4. And actually king is very safe on g4 in this position. So white's king is much safer than black's king. And probably black's best is to try to change queens and to play this very difficult endgame, of course, because white has a knight on f5, and still maybe white will even think if he wants an endgame or he wants to continue with queens on the board. But in any case, black's position is quite critical here. So knight f5 check, I don't know, king should go somewhere, but it's clear that white is at least better, if not winning. So that's why knight h4 was the plan, and actually very tricky idea, but just one very strong resource was missed by Magnus. Knight takes h4, bishop takes h4. So now, everything is hanging. almost all white pieces are hanging. But the king is, let's put it this way, is not very safe, black's king. And I'm pretty sure Magnus have seen my next move. That was not too difficult. I think he missed the one move after, because I played knight h5. This is the best move in the position. White could have actually saved, make a draw with bishop f6 here, and let's say queen f6, queen takes d7. But let's say takes, check, king f2, and yeah. I mean, the b pawn is pretty dangerous. Probably black will also has a lot of chances to give perpetual check. Black is not worse here, but it should end in a draw, this position. But I saw in advance that I have knight h5 now. So you see how difficult actually this moment, yeah? So black had to calculate all those variations after bishop f2 and all those also quite complicated variations after queen takes f2 check, very far ahead. And yeah, in this situation, even the best players in the world can make mistakes. So knight h5, because of course queen takes e1, yeah, now white is just mating black, queen h6, because bishop g3, knight g3, obviously. And after f6, probably I don't know what is the simplest way to win here. I suppose simply bishop takes f6, yeah, and then mate is coming. So this is losing. But the plan of Magnus was bishop takes h3. And actually, it would have been really a great piece of calculation, because if king h3, queen e1, now white is just not in time to mate black. Actually, it's vice versa. Queen h6, there is queen h1 move, queen takes g2 check, king h4, rook takes e4 check, and it's white actually who is losing. So, but why it didn't work? Because of rook g1. I think this move was missed by Magnus, and it seems that it's kind of strange move, yeah, rook g1. Looks very dangerous with this king and bishops very close to the king, but actually it's finishing the game after rook g1. So you see one little miscalculation. I mean, in a complicated line, sometimes the game turns into such pass that one small miscalculation can decide the game. And after rook g1, there is nothing black can do. I'm still threatening queen h6. Bishop g5 was played. Now, actually, white has two ways to win this position, but yeah, I don't know what happened this day, why I was calculating variations so well. That's usually not the case with me, but especially in the older age, when I was older. But this day I was just calculating, I mean, with extreme precision. So because actually bishop d4 is good enough, I was not 100% sure that it's winning because of this following very strange line. Queen takes d4, gh, it looks like it must be winning, but suddenly queen e5 check, takes, h4, okay, it looks like time to resign, but king f8 now. hg, rook takes e4. Let's say knight f6, rook d4. And now black wants, okay, of course, he wants to push his b pawn, and he wants king g7, king g6. I mean, there is a chance to end up actually rook and knight against rook here. In fact, white has a forced win just by tempi here, so it was also winning, but I was not totally sure, and instead I calculated precisely, actually played the first line of the engine, which is bishop f6. It requires quite some calculation, this move, but it's very precise, bishop f6. Because in case of, it looks like a blunder, well, first of all, if black is playing bishop e3, then already king takes h3, queen g1, and queen g3 is coming. That's a problem. And mate on g7. So bishop e3 doesn't work. Then bishop takes g2, of course, that looks like it's a draw, because if rook g2, queen h4 check, and black simply gives perpetual through e1 and h4. But the cold shower for black here is queen g3. And actually, it seems that it's at minimum one piece down. Actually, it's probably two pieces that black is losing because of this very bad, unfortunate position of his pieces after takes on g3. Of course, if bishop f6, then knight f6 check and taken on a8, taken on g2. And in case of bishop e4, bishop takes g5, it's anyway pretty bad. But I mean, black is even losing more material because knight f6 comes. So bishop takes g2 is losing. Then the last chance is bishop g4, but still white wins just by it's only one way for white to win. Still, I mean, this calculation is not that complicated. I mean, because most of the time black has only moves practically. Yeah, I mean, the other moves are winning rather losing rather obviously. So that probably that helped me to calculate variations very accurately in this particular game. So bishop g4, bishop takes g5 has to be played, bishop takes h5. And now actually, okay, bishop wants to get to g6, it's equal pawns, and in fact, if not the first line, the best move here for white, then engine saying that the position is just equal. But I saw already in advance that queen h6 is it's working just by tempi. And queen, because what to do, I'm threatening bishop f6. So bishop g6 is, of course, the main test. And d6. So black is just very unlucky because his rook is on e8. So d7 is a threat with a tempi. So d7 is threatening. Queen d4 is the only way actually to... there is never perpetual already now with the king on h2 with the black's color bishop. And after queen d4, d7. That is a very important resource. And yeah, after queen takes d7, bishop f6, and at the end of the day, queen d6 check e5. Very bad luck. I can imagine, you know, for Magnus, that all lines working for white just by one tempi. But yeah, sometimes it happens in life, yeah, that nothing works. If you make some small miscalculation, sometimes, you know, it happens that you actually make a very big miscalculation, a big blunder, but suddenly you realize that you have a resource and actually it was not a blunder at all. Sometimes you just miscalculate one small detail, like a move rook g1, and you know, and you cannot save the game anymore. So after queen h6, well, with a heavy heart, Magnus played rook takes e4, just at least to continue the game, because that line was very direct and would end in immediate resignation for black, because, well, now a very small... I mean, black is threatening rook h4 check with mate, but that's not too difficult to see. And anyway, queen takes h5, and here queen f5 was played, but that's already clear that white is winning. But still, I managed to find the most accurate way to win. It's queen h6, b3. What else? Bishop f6 now. And yeah, queen f4 check, otherwise mate is coming. Or you can play queen h7, but then the problem is again that my d pawn is promoting d6, d7. Well, on top of the fact that even if I play rook d1, it's just winning for white. So, and after queen f4 check, queen takes f4, rook takes f4. Again, white doesn't have to win by force. He can just remove his bishop and have a winning endgame. But the worst thing is that actually d6, white is just promoting. Rook takes f6, rook d1. And the rook cannot come back to the 8th rank. So rook h6 check, king g1. And black has to give up his rook for the pawn. And here Magnus resigned. Yeah, actually very good game. I'm quite proud, frankly, of this game because it was really played practically perfectly. And I actually, you know, I remember that all those variations, I mean, most of those lines I saw. I just have shown you a couple of things which I missed, but there were minor things. The major variations I saw, and I don't know what happened to me that day. But yeah, it was a good level. It was a really high level of play, and that was the only way to beat such player like Magnus Carlsen. I hope you enjoyed this game, and for a change, you had a very calculative example when you attack. Well, actually here in some way both were attacking, because bishop takes h3 moves on knight h4. Black was also counter-attacking, but all in all, black's king was of course much less safe than white's king. And so yeah, sometimes you need precision. So I hope you enjoyed this game, and then I will show you a couple of other victories against actually the winner of that tournament.